Hi, welcome to day 3 of the World Medical Innovation Forum. Thank you all for being with us on this journey. We're excited about what we have today. We'll be in this room from beginning to end. We'll wrap up midday with the announcement of the Disruptive Dozen. It's a real treat. Each panel, including this first one, I think are all on topics that are of great interest to us. Dr. Tony Rosenzweig, co-chair, is going to kind of set context where we're at in the progression among the 3 days and introduce the next panel. Tony.
Thanks, Chris, and let me just add my welcome back to all of you. I think when you have a 7:30 start, you see who's really devoted to this, so I appreciate all of the hardcore folks here who are interested, and I appreciate your coming in a little bit early this morning. So I think we've had a fabulous meeting so far, and yesterday I think we really drilled down into some of the specific challenges, but also I guess what I came away with was a real sense of optimism and opportunity, a lot of unmet clinical need, but a sense that we're poised now to really have an impact on a lot of important disease processes. And I think throughout that ran a theme of the coming deluge of data which we're going to need to understand the subphenotypes of human disease and really move to a point where we can personalize the therapies that we deliver to our patients. And so Chris didn't pay me to say this, but I think that is another pitch for next year's conference, because with that data comes the responsibility to analyze it and understand it, and I think that's going to be more than any of us can quite handle on our own. So thinking about how we mechanize that and protocolize that and have help from our digital friends will be important. Today we have some really special opportunities both to learn about specific disease processes, novel targets in coronary disease, novel approaches to clinical trials, but also an opportunity to learn from people who have really been at the forefront of leading our national policy on both drug and device development, as well as our research agenda with the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. Our first session, consistent with that, we're delighted to have Rob Califf, who's recently been the head of the FDA and now has returned to Duke as a professor in cardiology, to share some of his experiences with us. Chairing that session will be Joe Loscalzo. I think almost everyone here is familiar with Joe, but just to note a few high points. Joe is the chair of the Department of Medicine and Physician-in-Chief at Brigham and Women's Hospital. He's both the Hersey Professor of the Theory and Practice in Medicine and the Soma Weiss Distinguished Chair in Medicine at Harvard Medical School. He's also an incredibly nice person and one of the smartest people I think any of us know. So I'm really interested to hear the questions that he poses for Rob. So please join me in welcoming both Joe and Rob to the stage for this fireside chat.
Well, good morning, Rob.
Hey, Joe.
Thank you for joining us here today. I wanted to begin first by posing the following question to you. Given your extraordinary career as a premier clinical investigator and your recent experience as the FDA commissioner, what do you perceive, what do you see as the state of play of the field of cardiovascular drug and device development? What does the future hold? What's the trajectory?
Well, I think, as this meeting has shown, the science is extraordinary. But the practical reality, I think, at least as I see it, is quite different. Not that I would ever want to be provocative, but I see it as quite different between cardiovascular drugs and devices. The device arena is exploding with new things and exciting, immediate things that you can see that will make a difference. Cardiovascular drugs are really suck and win compared to other areas of medicine right now. And, you know, right before I left FDA, we did a study with McKinsey, and on a log scale, the investment in cardiovascular drugs is logarithmically behind fields such as oncology and immunology.
And why do you think that is? Is it because of the incredible cost of large cardiovascular trials, or is it a difference in focus with greater emphasis on precision medicine and cancer and immunology? What's the reason?
Well, I wish I could be definitive about this, but I certainly, as always, have opinions and theories, because I don't think anybody really knows, but factors that are almost certainly in play. One is that there are already a bunch of effective therapies, and we know that, for $4 a month now at Walmart, you can purchase 4 to 5 highly effective drugs for the common types of cardiovascular disease. And so you got to beat stuff that already works, whereas in some other fields, for example, rare genetic diseases where you have no effective treatments, it's a different story. But I'd also add to that the reimbursement system, I think, is really messed up. And so I'm no longer FDA commissioner. I'm now out in the free world. And if you just compared lives saved or life years saved, quality of life, drugs in different areas of medicine that have equal effects have very different reimbursement schemes. And I think that's having a huge effect. As I'm back out and actually talking to companies now, the view is that return on investment in cardiovascular drugs is just not there. And so even when there are options about where to go, people are going into other fields. And this is in the face of this booming epidemic of cardiovascular disease in the economically developing world. So it's very concerning. And then the last thing I'd say is about it that I think is a factor. It's very noticeable at FDA the difference in the ecosystem of areas that are booming and areas that are not. And the ecosystem, it sort of begins with where's the science, which I should have brought up as a key individual factor. So you have something like checkpoint, with oncology. It reminds me of when we figured out that blood clots cause heart attacks. Things take off when you have a breakthrough area of science. That's certainly part of it. But it also includes an FDA approach, which is innovative and creative, needs to be part of that. And very activated patients are now critical. If you look at something like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation or the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, you actually have patients raising money, which AHA does a good job of, but also actively seeking clinical trials. And so if you said, what's my confidence that I'll get this clinical trial done at a reasonable cost in a reasonable period of time, in some of these fields, it's moving very quickly because the patients are looking for trials rather than vice versa. And that's not so much the case in heart disease. I think we've gotten complacent. Heart disease is just part of the background.
In many respects, you can say that that cardiovascular drug development is the virtual antithesis of precision medicine-based drug development, that you do the most you can for the largest population of patients, looking at average responses. With a growing emphasis on more precise mechanisms that has been led largely by the oncology and immunology fields, it seems that the tide's turning. Whether the economic bank will burst as a consequence, and that's another story. But what do you think the future holds for that kind of strategy? Is there a promise of applying the same principles of precision medicine and systems pharmacology to cardiovascular drug development that might reawaken an interest in industry?
So this should be fun, Joe, because as we discussed working up to this, I'd like to hear from you about this, because it seems to me very clear that, first of all, what I'd say is that I think the preciseness of precision medicine in these other fields is greatly overplayed. And, in many cases, you develop a drug for a very specific target, and it actually works in other situations too. Just take cystic fibrosis with mutation-specific treatments, and then there's bridging, and, so where does it stop? It's not quite as precise as people say it is. By the way, I also would just want to point out that the failure rate, despite, if you read the press, you would think every targeted therapy for oncology works like magic. The failure rate in oncology is higher than other areas. It's still over 90%. So there's a little bit of myth going on here. But I think the future of this in cardiovascular disease is related to very complex systems, biology and pharmacology. You're one of the world's experts. But the problem with systems thinking is, how do you develop a specific drug target? And that may be why the pipeline looks so slim right now in this area. How's this going to work?
Right. Well, I think we know a lot about how it doesn't work right now, and I completely agree with you. There's hype in these very specific precision approaches as well as promise. And part of the hype stems from the fact that we still focus on a specific drug target. The FDA insists for approval that we have a specific drug target in most cases, as you know. And that, to a certain extent, puts blinders on the development process. You only look for toxicities that are mandated that you look for, like long QT. You don't look for off-target effects, sort of don't look for something you don't want to find, when many of those could provide promise for other therapeutic applications outside the area for which the drug was developed. So I think we need to begin to think about a more integrative way. It doesn't have to be a sort of classic systems approach, a more integrative way to look for the greatest possible drug-drug target interactions in a system so that we could explore the greatest risks for potential unwanted side effects and potential benefits in other diseases. I'd say another interesting feature of the hyperbole, and I don't mean to slam the cancer drug development community, but since none of the people here are cancer people, I can say these things, is to take the case of the checkpoint inhibitor treatment that you raised. You know, the consequences, the autoimmune consequences of treating patients with these agents really didn't get emphasized until well into a year of therapies with them. And in fact, it was known that these agents did induce autoimmune diseases. In fact, 10 years earlier, agents that inhibit these specific checkpoint determinants were used to develop models of autoimmune disease. But because cancer is viewed by the public and by the drug approval process in general as such a devastating set of diseases, there wasn't any emphasis on the need to look at those potential side effects. It would have been very different for our field had we had that kind of risk ascribed to one of our treatments. So I think there needs to be a sort of right sizing of the way one thinks about the approaches to precision therapies from a more integrative perspective, whatever analytical strategy you use. And I agree, we need to sort of suppress the hype and right size the expectation.
Well, not that I would ever argue, but just, I would argue the FDA actually doesn't care at all about mechanisms. In fact, if you can identify a clinical population, there's a treatment that improves survival or functionality without causing more harm than good, the FDA is going to approve it and send it on through as long as it's empirically demonstrated. But I do think what the FDA has said, CDER in particular, is if you look historically where there's a clearly defined target, you're more likely to be successful. So I think this question of how you actually apply the ability to look off target, which I know you're spending a lot of time on that, is something we really need to get better at, because we still have a game that's much more like soccer than basketball.
Yeah.
You take over 90 shots to get one in the goal in this field. And if you have to wait until a phase 3 clinical trial to figure that out, you got a big problem. And that's where we are right now.
Let me come back to this issue about targets versus phenotypes, because I did misspeak for purposes of hyperbole, but the question to ask from your experience at the FDA, is there a tendency toward thinking more about phenotype-based screening, almost a return to the past, rather than target-based screening? Or if one sees an effect without a clear pathway or target that you can prove is the cause for the effect of that agent, but it's a good outcome phenotypically, is that a logical course for drug development? Is it increasing in its acceptance by the FDA?
Oh, I mean, the FDA is charged with approving drugs based on demonstrated benefit for an identifiable population. So it's really, the end game is having clinical parameters that can be measured in practice to tell you who to treat, and empirically showing that benefits exceed risk. Now, how you get there is a different story. So in fact, you can imagine very expensive targets that couldn't be practically measured in practice that might be very precise, and that's another whole area that we'll have to get into. But at least for now, no matter how smart you are about the targets, you got to show an empirical benefit in an identifiable human population.
Well, let's turn a little bit to another topic, and maybe you could give us your insights about the differences between drug and device development. You highlighted the difference in the trajectories for those two early on in cardiovascular disease, but how are those approval processes and development processes evolving?
I think, there's been a lot of discussion for political reasons, I guess, about just looking at drug safety and not effectiveness as part of the equation. And that gets you into a whole discussion about why do we have regulation in the first place, and can't the market sort it out, and all that sort of stuff. But as we think about systems and when you draw the line between purely experimental therapy and having something on the market and post-market things, it really is quite different, I think, for drugs and devices. If you modify a drug, you tweak a drug a little bit, you essentially have to start over. Whereas with devices, the engineering leads to iterative development, which can allow for much earlier marketing and then development after that. And that may be why the investment coffers for devices are looking better than drugs right now in cardiovascular disease. But, it's a spectrum. Biologics are somewhere in the middle, depending on the type of biologic. But if you think about device development, the life cycle begins usually with an idea that's pretty much common sense, like a defibrillator, and then you make it better and better. And as you tweak, you don't go all the way back to the beginning. And so a lot more of that can be done through things like real-world observational analysis and registries. Drugs, I think, are a much tougher game because a small change, as we've seen many times, can lead to entirely unanticipated off-target effects, which I hope your work will help sort out.
Thank you. I wanted to turn a little bit to a discussion of nutraceuticals and foodstuffs, and what your perspective is on those markets, and whether there should be more or less regulation, what the consequences are to society for the current state of their approval processes.
Well, I think the next session is going to give a lot of insight into where this could all go. But essentially, the old statement is there are only two kinds of treatments, those where benefits outweigh risk and those where risks outweigh benefits. Absolutely true. And the idea that you can just advertise a food supplement for your prostate health, whatever that means, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. But it is an enormous market. Americans are spending billions of dollars on this stuff. Every study that's been done that I know of has shown no health benefit, and in some cases harm, as in the vitamin E in smokers, for example. And so I think we're going to ultimately have to get into a situation where we do actually empirically measure risk and benefit. But we're nowhere near that. The law prohibits that right now from happening, and I think that's a change. I mean, that does bring up a question that you asked. I don't see how we get away from large clinical trials in cardiovascular disease because there's so many people affected and there are already effective treatments, but we have to get more efficient, and that, I hope, the next session will go along that way. And the FDA needs to help make that happen, because consequences of requiring large trials that are done the same way that small trials are done is a cost that just drives people out of the investment pool. That's not good for public health.
Well, given the cost of these very large trials and our increasing ability to sub-phenotype populations into smaller segments, do you think there's merit in continuing to move the field forward in that way, rather than taking all patients with diastolic dysfunction or all patients with hypertension to reduce cost and improve the precision with which we can treat them?
Well, so first of all, you said given the cost. Let's don't accept that. It's really frustrating to me to see how we attack the basic science so vigorously, but you take something like a clinical trial where most of the money that's spent is frankly wasted on things that don't make a difference. Why don't we attack the clinical trial and get the answers that we need with the right sample size? But having said that, the consequence of subphenotyping, as we're seeing in cancer, is ultimately the realization that you need the whole population. You know, in the moonshot discussions, which were a lot of fun, you know, what evolved in that was a view that many oncologists now have, that if you are diagnosed with cancer, you need to go into a clinical trial that's adaptive for the rest of your life, because as you understand phenotypes better and better, the treatment that worked for a while stops working. You have mutation changes that occur, and you get into these factorial designs that are necessary because of combination therapy. So that begins to sound a little bit like cardiovascular disease.
Right. I mean, I guess the difference there, of course, is that the rate with which phenotypes change in cancer presumably is faster than would be the case for treatments in conventional cardiovascular diseases because of the mutability of the tumor genome. But clearly, diseases have natural histories, treated or otherwise, and those will change their phenotypes, their response to therapies, and may require newer strategies. And although we, as physicians, as practitioners, we deal with that all the time as we modify our patient's treatment plan, to do it in a more systematic way and to marry that to drug development is a different story. I agree with you. I think that's an opportunity we haven't fully seized upon.
You just described a learning health system. I think the rhetoric of the learning health system is fully formed, but the practice in our best academic centers like Duke and Partners, we're a long way from it, aren't we?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what the FDA really needs, is a learning system that's constantly generating information. Then you'd understand the risks and benefits.
Well, while we're thinking about that, the risk-benefit assessment, we're really, as we think about that point, we're actually considering, to a certain extent, the value of a therapeutic intervention. Tell us what you feel about value-based pricing and how one, if you agree that that's a reasonable strategy for reducing costs, how would you go about it? If you don't agree, tell us why.
Well, I mean, it may be a way to reduce costs, but I would just look at it as the only rational way to think about funding health care. We know that so much of what we do is practically worthless, and the incentives for payment right now often reinforce things that don't have much value. But the problem, and it was really interesting, you know, being at FDA working a lot with CMS, because we're all in the same HHS family, the problem we had was that there weren't many therapies that were evaluated adequately to actually calculate value, because people do very good at empirical trials to get on the market, and then you don't have much discipline in terms of the data that's collected or the kind of studies that are done. Let's compare that with the big businesses that are winning in America, like Amazon or Walmart. In their business, they do A/B comparisons as a routine, which is a pragmatic randomized trial with highly curated data. Their endpoint is how satisfied are you as a customer and how much money are they making. You know, we have something much more important. How long do you live and what's your function? And yet we're not doing those studies to provide the information that would be needed. So another way of saying it is, if we paid a lot for things that really worked and we didn't pay much for things that didn't work, I think the healthcare system would look a lot different. I'm not sure the overall total cost would necessarily go down, but the money would be better spent. And maybe Americans wouldn't live 5 years shorter on average than people in Japan, for example, and headed the wrong direction.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about insights that were surprising to you in your time at the FDA. What were the most surprising parts of your experience, good or bad, and how have they influenced your view of drug development now?
I'd say it was all good. I mean, there weren't that many qualitative surprises. That is, I'd done so much work with the FDA that I was comfortable. It's a tremendous group of people, great workforce, very dedicated. But the quantitative thing, like the power when you get 22,000 people, which is the combined federal workforce and the contractors, when they're focused on a topic, it's just incredible, amazing what can be put together. I would say maybe the thing that I knew the least about that was really interesting to learn is the importance of the interweaving of legal history and regulations over time on the way to behave. For example, political appointees like myself delving into individual product decisions is a no-no. And you can think of contemporary reasons for that to be the case, like you don't want politicians making those decisions. But it turns out when the FDA gets challenged in court, the tradition in court is to defer to the FDA because it's a science-based organization. And if political appointees start dipping into this, which they're legally entitled to do, then the courts may well say, okay, if politicians can make these decisions, as judges, we'll start making these decisions too. I also learned a lot about the First Amendment, and I'll just give one anecdote about that. And I think it's a very dangerous period right now, and I know the responsible part of the device and drug industry doesn't want it to go as far as it could. But, you know, the courts right now have a view that companies are people and they have the same First Amendment rights, which means it's very hard to stop off-label advertising and some of the bad things that happen there. I think we should all be worried about this because people are gullible, doctors are gullible. There's a whole issue of JAMA this week, I noticed, on these things. And we had better be careful about this. I would particularly be concerned about tobacco right now as an area that could, 450,000 people will die this year in America alone from tobacco-related illness. And if the brakes are put on the tobacco, enforcement of the tobacco legislation, it's going to be a huge number of dead people.
What if you were able to redesign the FDA, had a blank slate to do so, what are the kinds of changes you would make, if any, and why, without regard for whether they're feasible in the political climate? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are areas where I would increase regulation, like food supplements, cosmetics. I'm writing a little thing about that right now. There's no reason to go into detail there, but I would have it much more disease-oriented to match the outside world. So the Cancer Center of Excellence is now legally instantiated in the Cures Act, and that's happening. But, the way you've got the NIH, you've got the patient advocacy groups, and you've got medical products, and I think this ecosystem that I described will work much better. Patients don't care if it's a drug or a device, basically. As I've said, there are good reasons to have the laws different because of the cadence of development is different. But fundamentally, the outcomes of interest are the same, and I think there's a lot to be gained by integrating things better at the level of diseases of interest. And I think that's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And then cooperation among the federal agencies, I just can't stress that enough. I mean, I had a lot of fun with it, but right now, interactions between FDA and NIH, I think, are absolutely critical on the science side because the time from NIH grant to startup has gotten so short. We need to really make that work, and I think it is getting better. And then FDA and CMS, because you shouldn't have to do one set of studies to get on the market and then a whole different set of studies to get paid. So those are areas I would focus on.
Do you see a future for patient participation in post-approval assessment of the both growing benefits and growing risks of drug use in a more formal way? Is there?
Oh, I think, one really fun thing about FDA, I'd gotten involved in this before I went to FDA through PCORI, but FDA is through and through is dedicated to patient involvement, and I think it shouldn't wait till post-market. In fact, for devices, it's a routine question when you come in. Have you worked with patients who have the problem you're trying to fix with your device? And patient-focused drug development is a very important issue to make sure you're tackling the problems that patients are concerned about. in a really interesting analysis that was done through CTTI, which is a public-private partnership with FDA, it looks like you could speed up drug development by up to a year if you really involve patients early on. And then post-market, as we get into the world of sensors and social media, it's a different world of being able to report issues that come up, but also to do pragmatic clinical trials that might answer post-market questions about which treatment is best. I think the patient, I think actually the biggest force that's going to change the way things happen with the regulatory system are going to be the activated patients. And so it's another reason why we need to, I think we have a tendency to want to reassure people with heart disease, which is a good doctorly and nurse-like thing to do. We are taking care of it, but you need people to be a little bit unhappy to keep the pressure on. That's what's happening in some of these fields that are moving quickly, and something we need to think about in terms of the balance there.
Great. Well, I see the timer stopped, so I believe we're at the end of our session. But I want to thank you very much for a wonderful discussion, very thoughtful comments. Appreciate it.
Thanks,
Great.
Joe.
Welcome.